So if you're a viewer of my streams, you might have noticed that I sometimes use Reaper when I'm mixing. In this video, I want to explain why I choose to use Reaper and not just mix my projects in the same project that I do production in. Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. As I said, today we're going to be talking about Reaper. Partially this is so I can introduce the software to you guys so it becomes known on the channel. I can reference this video if I get comments in the future on why I use Reaper. And also because I get a lot of questions while doing this on live streams. If you follow my live streams at all, you know that I've sometimes mixed on live streams. Now there's a few benefits to this method that I'm going to go over later on in this video. But the real reason that I started doing it this way was because I had performance issues with my old PC. Now I have switched over to a new PC, so I could technically all do it in the same project without any performance issues. But there's still some mindset things that I just like about the Reaper workflow. So the very first reason is just the amount of control that you seem to have. If I go into Reaper and I just right click onto anywhere, what you'll see is that there's a drop down menu that will be very, very large, regardless of where I click. Here there's one, here there's a different one, there's a different one here. There's a lot of different controls and parameters that you can use. There's a lot of different item properties that you might want to interact with. There's a whole bunch of different things that you seemingly have control over. Now I say seemingly because I don't actually use all of these features in day-to-day mixing. Obviously you don't want to use all of the features you have at your disposal for every mix that you're doing. You just want to use the right features. But just the mental idea that you have this amount of control over the sounds that you're working with puts you in a mindset that allows you to think very technically about your mixing. And that transitions very neatly into the second major benefit. And that is that it puts you outside of the production mindset. And that's the most important part for me. What I used to do back when I did mixing in my old projects was that I would regularly go back into the sound design, into the structure of the track, making different changes on the arrangement, making different changes on individual sounds, which really isn't what mixing is. So ever since I was forced to adapt this workflow, it meant that I was put into this different mindset. And I found that I really liked the mindset of just being a mixing engineer and no longer being a producer. It allowed me to fully invest into techniques that you can only use in the mixing session, in the sense that when you're mixing, you don't have access to the original sounds. You don't have access to the original MIDI, to the original patch, to the original effects that were originally on the track. You have to deal with all of the imperfections that are in there. And sometimes I found that there's a kick that just doesn't work, or there's a sound that just doesn't work, and either I scrap it from the project entirely, or I do go back into the production process and make one change. But the difference is that it's one focused change that is actually fixing a problem that I cannot fix within the mix. It is not something that I can go back into just because I can. Because if you think about it, when you're in this mixing project, you're in a new project. So if you have to go back into the old project and actually fix something, it's become a hassle. It's no longer something that is easy to do. And therefore it forces you to think outside of the box, and it forces you to work with what you have, which leads to faster results. Now that still doesn't really answer the question, because I could just export the WAV files from Ableton and then import them into a new project, also in Ableton. Why did I buy a new DAW just to do this? And the reason for that is how Ableton reads files. And I don't know the technical details. There's definitely some kind of black magic going on the Reaper side. But Reaper is just able to handle a large amount of WAV files much, much cleaner than Ableton does. What that meant is when I experimented with this kind of separated workflow within Ableton itself, that I exported all of the stems and imported them into Ableton, I could not actually get them to play. They would stutter, I would use a lot of CPU, and what actually was the bottleneck was the speed of my SSD at the time. Currently I have a faster SSD. I now have one of those M2 drives, which you plug in directly on the motherboard, which is even a tier faster than the old school SSD drives that I used to have. So this might no longer be a problem. But at the time I only had a traditional SSD, and even on that I would have problems with very large projects, say 100 tracks, not being able to play back within Ableton. Now Reaper was really the best for this, because Reaper is a mixing focused DAW. It's not designed for production. Obviously it can do that, and it's a very powerful DAW in production as well. But it was really designed for mixing engineers, which obviously means that you need a lot of high quality files that you can read. You need a lot of recordings that you can read, and those are saved somewhere. So Reaper has some kind of strange algorithm at least for me, I don't know exactly what it's doing. That just makes the file reading a lot easier because I have never had any struggles with Reaper when I'm just reading it off an SSD. I did have issues sometimes when I read it off my external hard drive, but that's the worst case scenario. Obviously that's going through USB, so that's a very slow reading speed. But anything above an external disk in terms of reading speed was fine with Reaper, even though it caused problems with Ableton. The last thing I'll say on this topic is that it's all a very subjective thing, which DAW you use for which process, how you do your processes, how you do production, mixing, mastering. A lot of people kind of don't work in phases anymore. It's like one big process from start to finish, especially if you're using something like the clip to zero method in production. That is a method of mixing that actually starts at the production and ends at the mastering, so it's all kind of one big phase. For me, I still like to separate it up into different phases. That has given me the idea that I'm focusing on one thing at one time. When I'm producing, I'm writing a track, and I don't really have to worry about how everything sounds precisely. I can leave my kick and bass be a little bit more messy. I can leave those synths a little bit more unprocessed. And as a result, I can be faster in actually writing down the ideas that I have. So I'm more creative. I use more of my creativity to actually write music. But if I need to export something, I need to spend a lot of time exporting each individual stem, which takes a lot of time, even though I can now do it automatically. I've done a few videos on Ableton rendering problems. In the first one, I actually talked about not being able to automatically export all of the tracks, but having to do it one at a time manually by soloing each track and then exporting the master, which was a very big hassle. But now that that is fixed, it's actually a lot faster to actually work like this. But still, obviously, it takes a lot of time to export something like this. To give you an idea, a track of about 100 channels, where you have 100 channels that you're actually exporting, so excluding any of the groups, any of the other tracks that you might be using. If you have 100 tracks with audio on them, it takes about 2.5 hours to export all of it for me. Obviously, that depends on the length of the track as well. Psytrance is a genre with very long track lengths, so obviously that's a little bit of an amplified problem for me. Tracks tend to range from about 7 minutes up until 11-12 minutes, something like that. If you're working on, say, a pop song or even a different type of EDM song, then those export times will be a lot shorter because your track is a lot shorter. So those are the reasons why I use Reaper, and I just wanted to kind of walk you through. This is kind of also an introduction for me to start featuring Reaper more and more on the channel in tutorials as well. I actually have a tutorial coming up on 5 different mixing tips that I picked up over the mixing sessions that I did, which I think is very, very interesting. If you're interested in seeing that, it will probably be the next video that I post. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss it, you can subscribe. And if you really want to make sure that you don't miss it, you can turn on the bell notifications and YouTube will send you a message whenever I upload. If you have any other questions or you want to say something to me, then leave a comment down below. Even if this video is old, I will get them on one feed and I will be able to respond. I tend to respond to almost all of the comments that I get. So that's going to be the video for today. I hope you liked it and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.